Chapter 13 The Legend of Euclid. Having disposed of the establishment of Masonry in Babylon, the legend of the craft next proceeds by a rapid transition to narrate the history of its introduction into Egypt. This Egyptian episode, which in reference to the principal action in it has been called the Legend of Euclid, is found in all the old manuscripts. It forms the opening feature of the Halliwell poem. Being in that document the beginning of the history of Masonry, it is told with circumstantial minuteness in the Cook manuscript, and is apparently copied from that into all the later manuscripts, where the important details are essentially the same, although we find a few circumstances related in some which are omitted in others. Divesting the narrative of the archaic language of the manuscripts, the legend may be given as follows. Once on a time, to use the storyteller's style, Abraham and his wife went to Egypt. Now Abraham was very learned in all the 7 arts and sciences, and was accompanied by Euclid, who was his scholar, and to whom he had imparted his knowledge. At that time the lords or rich men of Egypt were in sore distress, because having a very numerous progeny of sons for whom they could find no occupation, they knew not how they could obtain for them a livelihood. In this strait they held a council and made proclamation that if anyone could suggest a remedy, he should lay his plans before them, when he should be suitably rewarded. Upon this Euclid presented himself, and offered to supply these sons with an honest means of living, by teaching them the science of geometry, provided they should be placed by their fathers under his exclusive control, so that he might have the power of ruling them according to the laws of the craft. To this proposition the Egyptian nobles gladly consented, and granted Euclid all the power that he had asked, and secured the grant to him by a sealed commission. Euclid then instructed them in the practical part of geometry, and taught them how to erect churches, castles, towers, and all other kinds of buildings in stone. He also gave them a code of laws for their government. Thus did Euclid found in the land of Egypt the science which he named geometry, but which has ever since been called Masonry. I have said that while all the manuscripts agree in the prominent circumstances of this legend, there are in some of them few discrepancies as to some of the minor details. Thus the Halliwell poem makes no allusion to Abraham, but imputes the founding of Masonry to Euclid alone, and it will be remembered that the title of that poem is The Constitutions of the Art of Geometry According to Euclid. The Cook manuscript is far more full in details than either the Halliwell poem or the manuscripts that succeeded. It says that Abraham taught geometry to the Egyptians, and that Euclid was his scholar. But a few lines after, quoting St. Isidore as its authority, it says that Euclid was one of the first founders of geometry, and that in his time there was an inundation of the Nile, and he taught them to make dikes and walls to restrain the water, and measured the land by means of geometry, and divided it among the inhabitants, so that every man could enclose his own property with ditches and walls. In consequence of this, the land became fertile, and the population increased to such a degree that there was found a difficulty in finding for all employment that would enable them to live. Whereupon the nobles gave the government of their children to Euclid, who taught them the art of geometry, so called because he had, with its aid, measured the land. Footnote. Geometry, from the Greek ge, land, and metron, measure. When he built the walls and ditches to separate each one's possession. The needless repetitions and confusion of details in the Cook manuscript show that the author had derived the information on which he constructed his legend from various sources, partly from the authority of St. Isidore, as he is quoted in Higden's Polychronicon, and partly from the tradition of the craft. The later manuscripts have copied the details of the legend as contained in the Cook Codex, but with many omissions, so as to give it the form in which it was known to the craft in the 16th and 17th centuries. Thus the Dowland manuscript, whose date is supposed to be about 1550, gives the story almost exactly as it is in the Halliwell poem, except that it adds Abraham and Sarah as dramatis persona, making it, in this respect, coincide with the Cook manuscript, and probably with the form of the original legend. In this it is followed by the York No. 1, 1600, the Grand Lodge, 1632, the Sloane, 1646, the Lodge of Hope, 1680, the Alnwick, 1701, and even the Papworth manuscript, as late as 1714. The Lansdowne manuscript, 1560, and the Antiquity, 1686, have the legend in a very imperfect form, and either did not copy or greatly curtailed the Dowland manuscript, as they but slightly refer to Egypt and to Euclid, and not at all to Abraham. As to the reputation for great learning which the legendists have given to Abraham, although the Bible dwells only on his piety, they found their authority in Josephus, as well as in Isidore. Josephus says that among the Egyptians he was esteemed as a very wise man, and that besides reforming their customs, he taught them arithmetic and astronomy. It is evident, as has been already noticed, that the legend of the craft has been indebted for much of its materials to the antiquities of Josephus and the etymologies of St. Isidore and the Polychronicon of Ranulph Higden, the first two, at second hand, in all probability, through the citations of those works which are made in the third. The Krause manuscript, which is said to have been translated from the English into the Latin and afterward into German, and published by Dr. Krause, gives the legend in an entirely different form. Footnote. Die drei Altesten Kunstnerkunden 359-113. Notwithstanding that I have declared my belief that this document is spurious, with a date of not earlier than the second decade, or more probably toward the middle of the 18th century, yet, as an indication of the growth and the change of the legend at that period, it will be worth while to compare its form with that in the older manuscripts, at least so far as relates to the Egyptian episode, which is in the following words.